Welcome to this week's Two Men in the Middle. This is where two men in the middle of the country get together and talk politics and current affairs, all kinds of stuff. I'm Craig Huey.
I'm Brandon Koenig.
I paused it because I'm holding my mic, and then you held your mic too. You took yours off the stand.
I figure I might as well.
It.
Yeah.
It really. If I'm one person's holding a mic, both of us have to hold mics.
Yeah, otherwise it's a little bit unbalanced. Plus, it gives you more flexibility. You can walk around. You don't have to, be focused on speaking directly.
So in the world of amateur podcasting, we let the cat out of the bag a lot here. We have a grand total, I think, of $286 invested into the equipment, and we're down a mic stand. So that's why we're holding mics at this point.
Right.
So, Brandon, I asked you this question in the parking lot. Did you see the next president of the United States on the stage last night?
I saw a couple of individuals who I think could definitely be the next president of the United States. I still think those individuals still have some work to do, but there were some bright spots. Clearly, Kamala Harris stood out, made a name for herself. Was very passionate, went toe-to-toe against Joe Biden, I think also fairly effectively. And then Pete Buttigieg. This was his first time on the debate stage with fellow contenders for the nomination instead of just in a forum setting. And he was also very compelling and articulate. Several people around me, when I was watching it, said that you wouldn't have known that he is just a mayor of South Bend. You would think that he's this longtime senator or congressman based on the answers he gave and the substance. And I think he also handled the question around the police situation in his hometown as well as he could under the circumstances. That was also because that was very difficult terrain, because he's getting hammered back home for that. So those were two very compelling, and let's talk about it. Wasn't a good night for Joe Biden.
I don't see how you could defend Joe Biden's.
He underperformed, and he showed a lack of capacity for going off of talking points. I mean, he seemed to just, try to stick to talking points as much as possible. He came up dry. He also came up as defensive and unable to, defend himself in a compelling way when his record was attacked. And we all knew this was going to happen, right?
Yeah.
He's leading in the polls, and he should have expected that all crosshairs would have been on him, and the fact that he was what I think as unprepared as he was surprising.
I forget the word you used last week, but it was when listening to the pod, you used a word to describe Biden's campaign so far, and it was like average. It was non-inspired.
It's lackluster.
Lackluster.
Yeah.
I think that described his performance, his prep, his response. Everything about Biden was lackluster.
Right. Well, I've said this whole time he's kind of just phoned it in, right? He's just basically been there.
Yep.
Showing up, not going the extra mile, not being as engaged. Acting like that the race is kind of over, and he doesn't really have to do much.
Well, if you were waiting for is this when he hits the gas? That was a no.
That did not happen.
This is not there. A couple of takeaways for me. One, Pete Buttigieg obviously listens to the pod because he heard what we said last week about the power of the apology and the power of taking accountability. And you're right.
And nobody does that today in politics. Nobody.
Biden didn't either. I mean, Biden got defensive.
He doubled down.
Deflected. He doubled down. The other thing, too, about Buttigieg is you're right. If you would have said point to the mayor of South Bend, Alabama, most people probably would have pointed to Swalwell or
Indiana.
Bennett or whoever the kook lady was at the end of the stage. I had no idea who she was.
Marianne Williamson. Yeah,
I
knew her by name, that she was an author, and that's about it. And she added, colorful, commentary at times. That was about it.
She's the candidate I think we're all looking for.
Yes, just a little bit of love.
God. The other thing too, I think that was. Buttigieg had a great night.
By the way, Buttigieg also set himself apart on healthcare. I think it was after Sanders, went on and rambling kind of about, his plan and paying for everybody. Buttigieg was the only one who said, "Wait, we need to back up. We need to know how we're going to pay for this."
Yeah, he was the only one who
We can't deliver
mentioned
promises that we can't pay for, and consumers need to retain choice. We need to make sure that whatever system we adopt, that there's that element of choice, which I thought was, again, spoke to modern moderates to independents.
Yeah.
That's the message that resonates in the general. And the other contenders would be wise to, emulate that and be mindful of that.
So let's set back to Wednesday night. And I'll freely admit, I was ducking in and out of this on Wednesday night. That was obviously the JV squad.
Too, yeah.
There was nobody compelling on stage. Did you see anybody outside of Elizabeth Warren that can pull over 2 to 3%?
I thought Julian Castro also kind of set himself apart on when they had talked about immigration and the iconic image now that we've all seen of the father and his daughter, and how passionate he was about that. Also, speaking Spanish, I think, that was something that we hadn't seen before in a Democratic debate. Several, who did that.
Let's unpack that for a second. I thought that was ridiculous. I thought everybody that did it looked ridiculous. I think Beto O'Rourke...
Well, it comes across as pandering.
And Corey...
Obvious pandering.
Absolutely. And I thought both of them just ended whatever small chance they had right there. Beto O'Rourke ended his political career.
He didn't really have a standout moment, I don't think.
He did not. And he just looked silly multiple times.
Yeah.
And Beto O'Rourke likes talking. He likes telling stories. It is obvious now he has no policy chops at all.
Substance, yeah.
And he cannot hang on a bigger stage.
I think that's exactly right. And, he really needed a breakout moment because he's gone all the way down to 1 to 2% of the polls. And he didn't have that. So I don't see how he survives. And I would not be shocked if he gets out fairly early.
Does anybody from night one, other than Elizabeth Warren, who I think she phoned it into.
Yeah.
She looked at that crowd and said, I have no reason to make a mistake here. I'm just going to kind of switch into second gear and,
it's a JV
write this
team,
out.
right.
Yeah. She's not going to fight hard with that group. Other than Elizabeth Warren, is there anybody that makes the cut to the main stage after that debate on Wednesday night?
Wednesday nights, I don't think so. I think she's the only one. There was nobody else, I think, who stood out, and that was their opportunity to do so, and I see that happen.
That whole field had a crystal clear run to elevate themselves, to make themselves stand out. It was a low energy and a kind of absolute the junior squad. None of them could take advantage of that.
Right, especially compared to last night's debate. Very low energy.
Yeah. Okay, so we got Wednesday. Warren moves on. The rest of them just go ahead and kind of flush out, and then we get back to the main event, which was last night. As a Democrat, I think we all recognize that you tack hard to your party's edges in a primary. You center up in the general. That's typically how you win an election.
Right.
But your main attack as a Republican on me has been, and the case you're making is the Dems are going left, and left again.
Yeah.
They are a
They're
party that
taking
cannot be
positions that
trusted.
are untenable in the general, which will require them to either hold to those positions, which are going to be disastrous, or to backtrack, which makes them look hypocritical. And so that happened several times last night. And a good example, and we talked about this offline, and I tweeted about it, was immigration, where basically all of the candidates said that crossing the border should not be illegal, that it should be decriminalized, basically.
Every candidate raised their hand said, would you make it a non-criminal offense?
Right. And that's shocking. I mean, that really is a departure from any norm we've had. Barack Obama didn't hold that position. Hillary Clinton did not hold that position.
So think back. I think what I hear you saying is you can't think of any mainstream candidate for president that has ever taken that position.
No, I really can't. In kind of in a similar vein, taking the position that you would abolish ICE. We had that as an issue in the 3rd Congressional District race here, where Sharice Davids had mentioned in an interview that she would do that, and then she backtracked on that, and has stayed with the position that she doesn't think ICE should be abolished, because clearly that wasn't a mainstream position that she could hold in a swing district like this. But if you're taking the position that you want to decriminalize crossing the border, that's not only not a mainstream position in swing districts, that's not a mainstream position in any district. Not. And so I don't know how that you hold to that. You also play right into Republicans' hands who, name call you and say that you're you're pro-open borders, because this whole time Democrats have said, no, we're not for open borders. We just want reform. We want common sense. We want quick processing. But here, everybody basically said they are. I mean, to say that you're going to decriminalize crossing the border, I mean, what's more open border than that?
Absolutely. You took the one thing that you're trying to avoid that the Republicans can pin to you, and you stepped right into it. There will be an attempt to unpack that by whoever wins and gets to the general, but that's going to be a hard one to distance yourself from.
That was very striking. The other one was the handful of candidates that raised their hand and took the position that they would abolish private health care insurance as well.
That's another one.
And again, Kamala Harris, who otherwise had a great night, walked into that issue again, and she already had walked into that during her announcement where she had alluded to the same thing and then backtracked the next day, and then she did that again. I mean, it's like, deja vu. She, raises her hand, and then, the following day, she just completely...
She's already tried to wiggle out of that.
Right.
She already realized, oops, that was a mistake.
But it's on the same issue. She does it again. I don't understand that. How can you...
It's the issue I brought to the forefront, and
Right.
then she's going to play the I didn't understand that.
The only thing I can think of is that she's really feeling pressured by the grassroots to take that, even though she knows it's not untenable. So she's like going back and forth. But she can't afford to do that much longer. I mean, that's something that she needs to get ahead of and stay on one talk track. And she's not on that.
Who were the four candidates who said they would abolish private insurance? It was Kamala, Bernie, Warren, and Castro, I think.
I think it was Castro was the fourth, yeah.
Those were the four who basically said, not only do we want a public option or a Medicaid option for all, we are going to do away with how we distribute access to health care in the United States through private insurance. That sounds, again, like a 10-word answer in the primary that will be quickly abandoned once the general election comes along.
Right. I mean, it's not tenable. I mean, Americans don't want a wholesale change like that that's extreme and quick, and that's going to completely upend their entire lives. And that's what that would happen. There's a major case to be made for reform, for looking at expanding Medicare, looking at Medicaid, being able to build upon what Obamacare is and make it more successful. But that's a huge leap to make because you're talking about millions of Americans who would see their insurance immediately changed, who already have private insurance.
Yeah, that answer breaks down, or the ability to do that breaks down day one.
And healthcare is 1/3 of the economy.
President.
I mean,
absolutely.
You're tinkering. You're not even tinkering. You're slicing and dicing with a major part of our economy. So it's not realistic.
I think they said 1.3 million Americans are employed in that industry.
Right.
So you're just going to get rid of that. And some people talked about it again, about executive order, talking about how easy this would be, that this was not something that would impact the economy, and just showed a real lack of understanding of what it means to wipe out private healthcare insurance in the United States.
Exactly. Well, and again, it showed invoking executive orders. I think, I think that's the last thing you want to do too, because that's a point that you can differentiate yourself from Trump on, because Trump has, relied on executive orders on many issues. If you look at, his reliance on emergency declarations, the buildup of presidential authority. And so the Democratic talk track now for several months has been, executive overreach and executive abuse. And it's hard to continue down that talk track when in the same vein you say you can change, the entire nation's economy in regards to healthcare through executive orders. It's not. So
Cocaine
feasible.
Mitch, I think, has got mentioned both nights on the Democratic
He's
debate.
Relatively popular on the Democratic stage.
He's an easy pinata to take a swing at. And you mentioned, too, that moderates like talking about anti-corruption and kind of getting back
and that's
to money out of politics. Nobody seemed to take a run at that.
To her credit, Kristen Gillibrand did bring that up. She briefly pivoted to that. I forget which question, but about corruption, and that comes from the influence of big money in politics and being able to tackle that. But she did it continue. It was literally 30 seconds, and then nobody else picked that up from her. Nobody sees that opportunity, which again I felt was surprised by, because that's an issue that unites so many. I mean, that cuts across party
Yep.
lines, ideology, and the fact that they wouldn't do that. And I think it was a question from one of the audience members at the end, a woman from Portland, who asked, what would you do to, structurally improve our democracy? We've had a president who has violated
I saw
democratic
that.
norms,
Yeah.
just incredibly. And so I thought that was a good question, and they were forced to answer. But that should have been a theme that was invoked by one or more of them throughout the night, and it really wasn't. And again, they stuck to very specific issues when they could have, weaved a lot of these into the overall theme of restoring our democracy, restoring checks and balances, integrity in government. Because if you can't restore checks and balances, integrity in government, democratic norms, you can't do any of those other things anyway.
And Kristen Gillibrand came off sometimes as shrill. She came off as somebody.
She only has one tone.
At 11.
Yeah.
You talked about it. She was
Intensity.
very monotone. She was intense. But Kamala Harris is a professional politician.
Yes.
And when her
And that
use
was
of
obvious.
emotion, when she went at Biden.
Right out of the gate,
did it
actually.
very differently.
When, right out of the gate within the first 10 minutes, when there was all the sparring back and forth and the moderators couldn't get control and it was Kamala Harris's turn to answer, she delivered kind of the best line of the night when she said Americans are not looking for a food fight. They're looking to put food on their table. And granted, that was a rehearsed line. She had that ready, but she had the perfect opening. She had the opening she needed for it, and it was perfect to set the tone.
And
for that night.
That's what you're hoping Biden would do a few times.
Yes.
Have a few of those in the bank. That
And he didn't have any of those.
He seemed to be completely unprepared. So if we look at the field, and I think we talked about, you can easily narrow this to the 5 or 6 who need to move forward. And it's important that we get down to 5 or 6 because we've got some real things to unpack with this field, and we need to hear more from people on important issues like healthcare, immigration. We really have to push the rest of these people off to the stage, get down to the serious contenders, and move forward. I get it. People are pissed that this process does that quickly, and there may be some candidates on there that are at least interesting enough to hear more out of. But in how we do this, there is no way to continue 20 people forward, 2 debates, 2 stages, 2 nights.
Because the time is just so limited, and when you have that many people on stage, and granted, you could detect the frustration with many of them when they were cut off and they continued to talk because I get it, they didn't get to finish their thoughts, they have more they want to say, but that's the problem when you have this many people in the field. You got to narrow down the field to 4 or 5 so you can get into those deep discussions and get beyond talking points and sound bites. Otherwise you just have sound bites and talking points.
So as a moderate, the Wednesday night I was disappointed in the entire thing. Last night, it was obvious that as a moderate, my 2 biggest choices, or my 2 most obvious choices, are Biden or Buttigieg.
Yep.
I think Bennett and Hickenlooper, they could be possibly, but they just don't appeal enough. They just don't.
They
they're not
tried to
gonna
make
get
that
there.
case, but they don't have the national appeal. I mean, they don't have the charisma. I don't see a path for where they can take that.
So it seems like there's developing. If you're a progressive, we're going to give you Warren, Bernie, and Harris.
Yeah.
If you're a moderate, we're going to give you Biden and Buttigieg. I don't know if anybody else can break into the moderates lane. Klobuchar. She was okay, but she underimpressed.
Right, she didn't have any breakout performances.
No.
She didn't do anything that was negative, and I mean, she focused on her record and focused on winning Trump counties in Minnesota, which is great. But again, the challenge for her is how she breaks out of that pack.
Yeah.
And there doesn't just seem to be an excitement, an energy around her, and I think she's going to struggle with the Democratic base on that. So I
think so.
Yeah.
And she doesn't have enough progressive stroke to her to bleed off anybody from one of the main progressives.
And she would need, she doesn't need to be, completely check all the boxes for being progressive, but she would need to check a few that would enable her to stand out among her peers, and she really doesn't. There's nothing where progressive activists can say, oh, I like her better on this, or she championed this, or she was able to pass or achieve this, and these others weren't. She took the lead here. She doesn't really have that. So again, where she is able to differentiate herself, it's not there.
So the one category is this progressive wing, and you've got the older, established socialist progressive in Bernie. You've got the policy wonk progressive in in Elizabeth Warren, and then you have kind of, I'll say, the social justice progressive in Kamala Harris.
And Kamala Harris is also kind of that new generation intersectional.
Absolutely.
Well. So she represents that
immigrant family, woman of color,
right?
Checking off a lot of boxes here. And then on the centrist side, here's where you've got a very stark choice. The establishment, the 45-year, nobody gets more established a politician than Biden, or this complete unknown. Pete Buttigieg has 25 IQ points on everybody in the field. There is no doubt about it. Does he have enough name recognition, experience to make middle-aged middle Americans feel comfortable voting for him as the president? I don't know if he can pull that off. Yeah.
I mean, that's hard to say. I mean, you'd have to go pretty far back, decades back, to have a president that was as young as he is, or and not even as young. But I mean, JFK was probably the youngest president,
and he was in his 40s, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think 45.
And I'll say it again. Local listeners will know what I'm talking about. Lenexa, Kansas, is the same size as South Bend, Indiana.
Right.
You basically would be electing the mayor of Lenexa to the most powerful position in the world. There is no comparison between him and Donald Trump, but it is hypocritical if you use Trump's lack of experience in government as an excuse to bash on him. Pete Buttigieg suffers from the exact same. You can make the same criticism of him. Now, they are two totally different people. Again, I think Buttigieg would wipe the floor with Trump in any debate. It would be a very interesting campaign. I just don't think he's going to get there.
Yeah, I think that's definitely problematic for him. He would differentiate himself, with his military record. Yeah, being a Rhodes Scholar, all of that. But he doesn't have the experience level that his fellow contenders have, many of them on stage. And that was obviously what Biden stressed over and over. That was his, Achilles heel.
We'll get to Biden in a minute, but is this what we want as Americans? Is this what the presidency has become? Is the great legacy of Donald Trump is, again, now freshman senators jump in. This gets back to Obama even. Mayors of small towns, whoever that woman was at the end of the stage who was an author who was just a complete ditz. Is this, I guess, should we expect more out of the president? Did we used to expect more out of running for president? I looked at last night. A lot of times it was just a shrill argument. I saw way too many people on stage who, out of the 20, again, 15 of them should never be there.
Yeah.
I don't understand how, when before did people in Congress run for president? That was very rare. And where are the governors? Where are they
Lack
at
of
on the
governors.
Democratic
there were
side?
very few of those we saw on the debate stage, other than Jay Inslee, the night
who's
before.
A complete kook and non-starter,
and then of course Hickenlooper
and that's
last night. That's it. So, yeah, I think that we've been headed that way for a while, right? I mean, there was that criticism was leveled at Obama when he ran against, McCain, that he was a first-term senator, very fresh, and green. And I think, the experience factor has just been less and less. It's experience versus passion and intensity. Yep. And it seems like the activists based on both sides have gone for passion over experience.
So let's talk about Biden, and maybe we talk about it as from an in perspective. How many points, if any, does Biden drop in the next poll that comes out after that debate to performance? If we can, let's say, just for sake of argument, he's sitting somewhere between 36 and 38%, which is where he's been. How many points does he drop coming off of his Thursday's, again, lackluster attempt at that debate?
I mean, I think he drops at least 5 or 6 points, somewhere around there. I don't know. The reason I would say it's more than that is because this is the first debate. So, I don't know how dialed in and what the viewership numbers are yet.
True.
So being able to use that as a barometer. But yeah, I could see him, bleeding off 4 or 5 points. I think it'll be interesting to see where those voters go.
Yeah. If he drops 5 points, to me, that means he's beatable. If he takes that big of a hit off of what happened on Thursday night, that tells the entire field he is not the presumptive winner of this primary, that he can be beat, and people are looking for a reason to not vote for him. I think there's a chance he does drop 5-6 points. I think if he does, that is a huge problem for Joe Biden. I mean, last week we were 63% that he was the nominee. After watching that performance where everything that he couldn't do, he looked old, he looked dated. There's times when he looked confused. When somebody asks you to raise your hand, how hard is that?
Yeah.
He kept like poking a finger or something.
Right.
He gave up his time when Kamala Harris started cracking on him about race and his issues with busing in the 70s. He kind of ran out of steam at one point, just said, well, my time's up, I'm done. Nobody does that.
No.
Everything he couldn't do, he did. If he drops, let's put it this way, if he doesn't drop, then I think it's a sign to everybody, well, sorry, it's a Trump thing. It's a name thing. It's an Obama thing. He's got too much experience. Nobody's going to overtake him. If he does drop 5 or 6 points, I think that's a crack for hit him again and see what happens.
Yeah, and I may revise that. It may be too early for him to drop that much. But I don't see how he does a drop, at least a couple points.
In African-American vote, how did Kamala Harris, who was struggling mightily, even in California against Joe Biden, did her performance last night in any way help kind of move some of those voters back to her?
Well, I mean, she personalized the issue of busing and the fact that, Biden voted against busing. And so that, I think, it could be compelling for a large number of people. It's no coincidence that also at that time, her Twitter account posted the photo of her as a little girl, as being bussed.
Planned, coordinated.
Right.
And doesn't she... She is a very good politician. She's a very good debater.
Very
She's
savvy,
a good politician. All of the authenticity that Pete Buttigieg has, Kamala Harris has none of that.
Right.
It comes off as staged, contrived. Yes, last night it was very effective. One, it was very effective because Biden, again, for some reason, was caught flat-footed. He was also caught flat-footed by Eric Swalwell, who is not a very good candidate, who called him old, and he didn't have a good response for that.
No.
So you mean go into that debate, you have no prepared answers for somebody calling you old and somebody calling you out for what you said about senators and busing.
Well, it makes me wonder, what his debate prep was like, or did he have debate prep? I mean, if he didn't, that's even more concerning. All of this should have been anticipated. There was nothing that was thrown at Joe Biden that you could say was not unanticipated, and he wasn't able to handle it.
I get too that I kept watching that, and I kept trying to channel people in that upper Midwest Rust Belt, the rebuild of the Blue Wall. How do people in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, when they're watching that, what are they feeling? What are they thinking? Who are they gravitating to? And that's where I don't know if Kamala Harris, if we win California by 3 million more votes, or New York by 2 million, somebody had a tweet. I think it was David Frum.
It's an electoral game, yeah.
If we win the popular vote this time by 5 million and still lose the presidency,
can you imagine?
What does that mean?
Yeah,
and that could absolutely happen.
Well, I think that's still, and I think that also helps Joe Biden still early on. So we were talking about the national polls, but I think really what's going to be intriguing is looking at the polls for the early primary and caucus states.
Yeah.
Do his numbers move in Iowa and New Hampshire? And you have to remember those early states, with the exception of South Carolina, Iowa and New Hampshire are very monolithic. They're very white.
Yeah.
Not many minorities. So you're talking about, many blue collar, middle income Democrats, the people that are in Joe Biden's camp. And so, if those numbers don't move and he's able to hold that, there's a lot to be said for momentum. It's not everything, but when you come out swinging and you're able to win those early battlegrounds, it puts you in a good position to then kind of carry on through the rest of the race.
And South Carolina with the African-American vote.
Yeah.
If he takes South Carolina by 25 or 30 points and routes Kamala Harris, who will certainly still be around by when South Carolina rolls around, that may be another indication that this year is just stacked up to where it's his year. He's He's got his message of experience and
It resonates.
And you know me and you're comfortable with me. No one's going to be able to overcome
and another
that.
$1 million question is: does Obama endorse? Do we see
He has
Obama
to.
get involved
He has
actively?
to.
Because he invoked Obama several times, especially during his closing remarks. Clearly, he, that's part of his strategy to ensure that he is able to, play off of Obama's popularity. So resonate strongly with the base and tie himself as much as possible to the administration. And that came through when he talked. He didn't always say I. He talked about we, talking about the administration.
There were
we
multiple
were able to
times.
do this. We accomplished this. We started this. So people would associate him with Obama. And so that, I think, will make a significant difference if and when that happens, and when during the campaign it happens.
I think it'll wait until if he shows up the nomination or is very close. I think that's when that would step forward and he would go that way. I just, again, I always look for who is presidential on that stage. Last night got a little bit off the rails with the talking over, the shouting. There was a lot of people who, again, with that number of people on stage, it was obvious that it was most important to kind of get your voice heard. There were a couple of times it's like, okay, I don't understand what we're talking about anymore because everybody's kind of yelling and shouting. But it was easy to take that field, pick out the four that kind of matched that build. Everybody else wasn't even close. And it's time to go. Hey, Andrew Yang, I guess thanks for coming. You got 3 minutes of talk time in a 2-hour debate.
By the way, big bold prediction here. I'm saying it now. Marianne Williamson is not going to be the nominee. You heard it here first.
She's the nominee we need.
She's going to fight Trump's hate with love. All we need is love.
Her first thing as president, she's going to call the Prime Minister of New Zealand. I didn't understand what that was. Why is that woman? Why was she allowed to be on stage?
I don't understand.
That was a complete joke.
Although part of me would love to see her on a stage with Trump because they're both incomprehensible at times.
Well, she's our Rick Perry.
Yeah.
Rick Perry, if you remember, he was I'm going to cut 3 departments.
I could have named the 3.
Education, EPA, and I forgot the third. Ben Shapiro called her a character in a Woody Allen movie. I thought that was pretty good. I'd never heard of her before. I had no idea who she was.
I mean, until she ran, I was
there.
Heard of her, yeah.
What has she written? It said she was an author. I had no idea what she was talking about.
So she describes herself as a spiritualist.
Great. That's pretty much all you need to know at that point.
She's written, I think, like self-help books and like spiritual healing books. I think
it's almost like the RNC sponsored her to go on just to make the joke. Look at how far left and hey, upper Midwest Rust Belt folks, do you really need a spiritual healing person? Good night. We did reinforce some stereotypes about the Democratic Party.
Yeah,
we did reinforce the whole. In some ways, we're about free stuff. In some ways. Everybody talked about big government programs. Nobody talked about spending.
Yep.
And I guess your side isn't talking about that either. I guess that's just off the table for this cycle of American politics.
I guess so. And that issue, that question was actively brought up, and I think it went to Kamala Harris. And her response to that was, why haven't you been asking the Republicans that? Which is true, but
which is valid.
Which is valid, but at the same time, because the Republicans have been so hypocritical on that issue, it's an opening for the Democrats to seize it and say we're going to be the adults in the room.
Yes.
For many years we thought Republicans were the adults when it came to fiscal responsibility. They are not now. We will seize that mantle and we will bring fiscal responsibility to government. And they decided not to. They did not address that. Again, Pete Buttigieg was the only one who brought that up in any way, saying we have to be able to pay for any new programs we have. And he's the only one. Everybody else was just, pie in the sky. Bernie Sanders also didn't have a great night. He stuck to his talking points.
Oh, Bernie.
He was, I think evaded several times the question on whether or not his taxes, he would raise taxes on the middle class or the middle class would be impacted. And I think he finally kind of alluded to that there'd be an impact.
He finally had to say, oh, by the way, everybody's taxes are going up.
Right. And then he also looked kind of foolish when he was questioned by Rachel Maddow on a prior statement he made for his past support for guns. Because at one point, which he brought up his current NRA record, but at one point he was endorsed by the NRA early on when he ran. And so he basically said he was mischaracterized, and Rachel Maddow had to remind him, that's a direct quote.
Yeah.
That's not mischaracterization.
Yeah, I didn't paraphrase what you said. I read you the quote.
So that was pretty hilarious. And then the thing he uses his hands a lot, and it was funny. Did you see he almost hit Joe Biden in the face one time, and Joe flinched and had to reel back?
So two kind of political. I'm going to call it, movement is too strong of a word. Two political caricatures died in these debates.
Yeah.
One was Beto O'Rourke,
yep,
who this kind of ultra smooth, ultra cool kind of hipster. And I kind of have to agree with a lot of folks on the Republican side. Maybe the media had something to do with selling Beto O'Rourke a little bit.
Right.
Because when the bright lights went on him and his stage got bigger, he certainly did not live up to billing at all.
Right.
And the second
the
one
emperor had no clothes.
was Bernie.
Yeah.
I think Bernie kind of officially, whatever he had, it ended last night.
Well, and again, part of that, too, is that his mantle has been taken up by so many others and chipped away.
Yes.
Not on everything, but other contenders, piece by piece, have taken up different issues here and there. So he, again, can't demonstrate that contrast like he did with Hillary. It's a very different field this time around.
You've said this multiple times. I agree with you 100%. It's really a different game when you're not running against the most hated person that's ever ran.
That's very true.
And you're running against three other people who say the exact same stuff that you do, only better.
Right.
That would be...
And who are comfortable, too. They're
absolutely.
not... Hillary was not comfortable taking those positions, which is why, she hem and hawed and, was very evasive and refused to directly answer many questions. And that gave Bernie an opening. And you don't have that on the Democratic side. You had an instance last night where basically almost everybody said, they'd be willing to decriminalize crossing the border. And all of them have some version of, pretty progressive healthcare reform that they want to push forward. Very different than before. So Bernie he's not distinctive anymore. He's had to cede, his platform to so many others.
And what I didn't get was, Brandon, you are in front of a national audience lobbying for votes for the president of the United States. And we come to you and say, you have 45 seconds. You will not be interrupted. The floor is yours. Give us your closing argument. And Bernie basically said, nothing's going to get done unless we have a revolution. I don't know what is he talking about.
Yeah.
I don't... I agreed with the first part of what he says. Hey, guys, everybody up here is talking a lot of plans. This is going to be very difficult to do. These are big ideas. I'm like, Bernie, you got me. Now finish it. Come on.
Right.
Say something that makes me. But what we just need is a revolution. And it's like, that's idiotic.
Yeah, that's where you lose people. That's where you lose the middle, the general electorate. And again, I get that he's not playing to that group, but those are words that are going to come back to haunt him.
As in, if I want to adopt any of his policies, is he talking about a revolution of political thinking?
Yeah.
Is he talking a protest revolution, or is he talking we have to overthrow the government? I
right,
think
very ambiguous. You don't know what he's getting
understand. If
is it rhetorical? Is it
correct?
Direct? What?
If that's your closing argument to the United States people, I didn't get what are you talking about? Bernie Sanders lost the most because I think it was he just replayed. There was nothing new. There was nothing to move the needle, to gravitate to anybody. He's bleeding off voters to Biden, and now I'm sorry to Warren. He will bleed off voters to Kamala Harris now.
Well, an effective closing statement for him would have been, I've been fighting in the trenches for these issues for decades.
Yes.
Everybody on stage with me, I appreciate their enthusiasm, but they're all Johnny-come-latelys. But
I'm
thanks
the
for
OG
coming to the table. I was the one in the
That's
beginning
right.
alone speaking out, fighting. And he's like, he should say that's what gives me credibility, because I didn't have to come late to the game. Folks, who I am.
I was living in a compound in the 70s.
Right.
I went to the Soviet Union in 82 to really immerse myself in communism. If you want an old-fashioned American socialist, somebody who's believed that for the last 50 years, I'm your guy. And I agree with you.
He just comes across as kind of old and stale and just, not able to, same talking points, nothing new.
No, there was nothing out of Bernie that would have led somebody who wasn't already a hardcore Bernie supporter to say, I heard something I liked tonight.
Yeah.
And again, his presentation with how he speaks, Biden wasn't very good, but Biden was better than Bernie.
Right.
And if you put both of them next to Buttigieg is miles ahead of what they do.
It wipes the clock with them, yeah.
Harris is good, but Buttigieg by far was the most articulate of anybody on that stage.
Right. And again, I think Harris is going to continue to have the healthcare question problem if she doesn't get that under control, because that's twice now where she's fumbled with that and has had to backtrack, and she cannot afford to continue doing that.
So let's wrap up our coverage on the debates. About what I thought.
Yeah.
Very difficult format. I would give NBC kind of a C in putting these on. Anytime you forget to turn people's mics off stage and you have to take a commercial break, somebody should have gotten fired for that.
That's a huge mistake, yeah.
I didn't understand, too, the rotation of... there were like 6.
I was trying to figure that out too, and who received questions when. It seemed to be very.
And all of the moderators.
Yeah.
The moderators couldn't get into a flow because first it's Lester Holt and Savannah Guthrie, then Chuck Todd and Rachel Maddow jumps in. Then the guy from Telemundo shows up, and it's like, okay, what? I get it. It's 2 hours, but I think the moderator has to get in a flow too. That never happened.
And they're not able to do that when you keep switching up the moderators. Yeah.
No. So the whole thing, it feels like, okay, we did this the first time. We had to get this one out of the way. Let's come back in. When's the next one of these? In like 4 or 5 weeks or something?
Yeah, something like that. Sometime in July, late July.
This one might work the kinks out. Let's do a little bit better next time.
And let's stick with like 1 or 2 moderators. I mean, it's bad enough that we have this many candidates, and then we add all these different moderators to the mix, and it's a lot to keep track of.
I hate to say this, but Mueller is testifying on the 17th of July.
Right.
Don't really understand maybe I put it this way. Brandon, help me set my expectations.
We're not going to get anything new. He has already said this is what I would say if I testified to Congress, and we know what he said in his public statement. The only thing I think we might get is some more forceful pushback from him on some of these questions that get into detail that he doesn't answer, but he will throw it back on Congress and say, it's your job to decide if a crime was committed. It's your job to decide whether or not to impeach. And so I think that's the most we're going to get with him. And so Democrats are going to be confronted again with this dilemma that they continue to face, with dissension in the ranks. Do they go for impeachment or do they wait? And so that's really where the battle lines are drawn. Clearly, Nancy Pelosi is on the side that impeachment is just not an option. Politically, it's suicide. That there isn't appetite for it at large in the country right now. But she does have, and I would not a large number, but a very vocal minority of House Democrats that are on the impeachment bandwagon, very vocally.
So do you think this is, like I said, Nadler's trying to shame Democrats into moving forward with impeachment by having Mueller show up and give them some sort of lesson or talking to about what their responsibilities are?
Some of it might just be to keep it front and center for the American people, because I think part of the problem all along is, I think for anybody who actually read the Mueller report, there's a lot of damning information there.
Sure.
And so that everybody should be concerned with. But the fact of the matter is that most people haven't read the Mueller report. They may have heard bits and pieces here.
Yeah.
So how do you get that out in front of the American people for those that didn't see his press conference when it was on originally? Hearings are another way to draw attention to his words and get them out there in front of the American people again. So some of it may just be reinforcement to, remind people that, even if it can't be proven that, the president committed a crime, that there was enough that went on that is highly unethical and saying that, this, we should have a higher standard for any president.
Do you buy into this whole narrative that this is a risk because Republicans now are going to get to ask a bunch of questions directly to Mueller down this road of alternate crimes that were committed by Democrats, abuses of the FISA warrant around Carter Page? Do you think this is?
I don't think
that's
so.
An option?
Because again, Mueller is a career prosecutor. He's not a political person,
yes.
And he's not going to get in the weeds even with Republicans on those issues. I don't think he's going to take the bait, and I think he's going to decline to answer many of those and say that it's outside the scope of what he's there to talk about. And he's going to be very much on message, on track, just with the basics of his findings and not go beyond that. So Republicans would like that. They would like to change the focus. I don't think they're going to be successful with him. With somebody else, some lower level DOJ person, probably, but not with Mueller.
So people like Hope Hicks and stuff like that, there's been an attempt to get them to testify. All they said is, I'm not saying nothing.
Yeah, well, and because the administration has invoked executive privilege when it comes to Hope Hicks, even though she's no longer an employee. And so here's another issue that's going to be fought in the courts, whether or not executive privilege applies to, former employees, people that are not currently employed by the executive branch. So that's out there, which actually there was a interesting article, I can't remember, New York Times had about Hope Hicks and just about how her relationship with the president has really fallen and deteriorated. She used to be constant phone calls, on first name basis, and now there's no relationship there, which is interesting. She's kind of out of the orbit of the president.
Did you see they just took Melania's press secretary?
Yes, I saw that.
Because, again, being press secretary for the first lady has got to be a lot like being it for the president, isn't it?
Obviously.
That was sarcastic.
Well, no, it's sarcasm. It's loyalist. I mean, she's been a long time a loyalist to the president, not just to Melania, but to the president going back to the campaign. And the president is looking for loyalty now. He's, by all accounts, completely dismayed with his inner circle and with many of his cabinet officials. He thinks that they're not sufficiently loyal, and he wants loyalty above all else. And so that's what was the trigger for him picking.
What did I see that the acting director of DHS, they think he's the one who leaked to the media about last week's ICE raids that were called off.
Yeah.
There's a theory that he's going to get run off too. So we would be on our second acting director of DHS if this guy gets the boot for the leak.
That's true, yeah.
And the guy who was the acting national security advisor, he dropped out last week because he had some problems that he couldn't overcome to get to nomination.
We still don't have a permanent DOD secretary.
No. We
don't have a permanent secretary of the Navy. I don't think we have a permanent deputy secretary of the Army. There's many national security positions we're missing in the NSC that are vacated and haven't been filled.
Pompeo must be one organized dude because apparently he can run all of this.
I guess so. Yeah. It's staggering to really get to the heart of, especially right now with very tense moments with Iran.
Yeah.
And you look at our national security apparatus and the lack of people we have in place to advise the president. All of the cooler heads are gone. You look at John Kelly isn't there. You look at Mattis, who's gone. That there's just nobody left.
So,
and he's apparently unhappy with his chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, too.
God,
There's been talk about him being replaced.
When he coughed during that interview and he threw Mulvaney out?
Yes.
My God, that
Wow.
was... I am certainly not a fan of the president. That was awesome. that was one of the. A lot of times people see Trump as a stand-up comedian and entertainer. That was one of the most entertaining things I've ever seen.
That was very entertaining. Yeah,
and the fact that Mulvaney just kind of takes it. I get it. That's the president of the United States. The camera's rolling, but come on.
Oh. And again, I don't know how it gets back to the question of how do people work for the president, knowing that that's how the president acts. He has this tendency to treat everybody as just complete subordinates, and you're there, and he likes playing this game like everybody's at court, and whose head is going to get chopped off on which day. Everybody's job is on the line from day to day, and depending on what's said, you never know where things are going to go. It's so chaotic.
The 17th, I will certainly watch every word that comes out of Mueller's mouth. But I don't want to hear from anybody that, again, this is the kill shot. This is what we've been waiting for 3 years. I'm with you. I don't expect anything new to come out. Something has to tell me that hasn't Nadler and Mueller gone to dinner one night and worked out, listen, dude, are you going to, here's what I'm looking for.
I would think
so. Are you going
to,
I mean, why would he do this if he knew Mueller could embarrass him just by saying, I told you people at that press conference, I'm not interested in talking, read my report, I'm not saying anything.
I mean, that's why I really think it's an episode and just trying to provide further reinforcement for what we know. Get Mueller on a national stage, so Americans who haven't been following this as close may, take a second look and say maybe I should read that report or, skim through it to just get Americans to recognize, even though, this isn't being prosecuted, there are major issues here that violate our norms, and the lack of prosecution doesn't mean a crime did not occur. It just meant there was insufficient evidence to prosecute.
Once again, we're going to run down this narrow path of I don't have enough evidence to charge him. There's an OLC statement that says I couldn't even if I did, but I'm not saying he didn't do anything.
Yeah,
I suspect we do a rinse, wash, repeat of that. To me, this Mueller report is like the Democrats being only 2 points behind in Texas against Trump. It's not going to happen. Right. Don't count on it. Don't get yourself to a spot where you have any expectations that this is going to yield anything more than what's already come out.
Yeah, and I think you're right about that. I mean, I wouldn't expect any fireworks, anything new.
How's the how are you with the Supreme Court decisions this week?
I was disappointed with the gerrymandering case because I think that's a big issue, and I think the court, missed an opportunity to again be the adult and kind of rein in these states, these just incredible abuses. And for those that don't know the origin of the term gerrymander, so there was a state representative in Massachusetts.
Was it gerrymander?
No. So
okay.
Representative Jerry, and so he was the one that helped write some of these maps where the districts were so misshapen, for political gain. And there was a political cartoonist at the time, I want to say this was like in the 1820s, who was making fun of him. And so he drew a picture of a district in the shape of a salamander because one of the districts involved he thought looked like a salamander because it was all slinky. And he called it, though, a gerrymander after Representative Jerry. So that term gerrymander, his name, Jerry, and then salamander combined stuck. And so that's where we got the term gerrymander.
And this is a Republican thing. This is a Democratic thing. This is a who's in power thing.
Right. The two parties to the case that went all the way to the Supreme Court were North Carolina Democrats who were suing because of Republicans in the majority gerrymandering, and then in Maryland, Republicans suing because Democrats had gerrymandered several districts. So this is what parties do when they retain control. But it's continued to just become more egregious over time with some of these districts just being completely incongruous. I mean, spiderweb shaped.
They make no sense.
Because it's all about stacking your party's voters, in these areas. And so the only recourse now with the Supreme Court decision, which again, this was a 5-4 decision. It shows elections have consequences.
Nope.
5 conservatives on one and 4 liberals on the other. But the recourse really is for states to elect people in states that will approve nonpartisan voting commissions that can draw up the state boundaries, take it out of the hands of the legislators, or for citizens to pass it by referendum. And so that's a state-by-state issue because not all states have an easy referendum ballot process, but many states do. So one of the most recent states where this happened was Arizona. And NPR had a whole interesting podcast episode on this where they talked about how that worked in Arizona. It got passed by referendum and then was implemented. And I think they've had 2 election cycles now under it. And so you basically still have Republican control of the state's congressional delegations, but they've become more representative, and that control is more in line with the partisan makeup of the state. Because before it was almost like, I'm butchering these numbers, but I want to almost say it was like 5-2 Republican. Mm-hmm. And now it's, like 4-3. Yeah. And so it's just, which again represents the ideological makeup much more than it did before.
And what you said, what the court's decision basically guarantees is this is a state-by-state deal.
Yeah.
And if you are a state that is gerrymandered the hardest, there's no way you're going to go through the steps to to alleviate that.
No.
Because the power that controls the state wouldn't put forth a alternative to how you would map out these districts.
Right.
So,
and the court's opinion, as conveyed by Justice Roberts, was that, it was basically said that we're not, giving our stamp of approval of what's going on or saying this is right.
Yeah,
we're saying
we
it's
just
not
don't
our
think
prerogative
it's not a
to weigh
federal
in.
issue.
Yeah, it's not a
Yeah.
federal issue.
What about Keegan, who wrote the dissent?
Very scathing, yeah.
And she's like, we get involved in this shit all the time.
Right.
I mean, if you didn't want to do this and you found some other legal precedent or legal grounds, that's one thing. But just to say this is a state's issue, I kind of agree with her. That's a bit of, come on, we can come up with something better than if we don't want to do this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, equal representation clause, which has been used time and time again to get involved in the states. That was the basis for getting involved in Bush v. Gore in Florida, which you could argue was a state's issue. I mean, if you go back throughout our history, I mean, typically states' rights is related to segregation, basically intermarriage among the races. All of that has been decided at the federal level because the feds have said,
yes,
this is an issue for us to weigh in, even though
doesn't
the
that seem
argument
to
has
fall
been
right squarely into that area?
I think it does.
I think it does.
So again, so the court punted on this. So now these states have carte blanche to draw these boundaries however they want without fear of lawsuits. And so it's really up to citizens in those states to either elect people who believe in nonpartisan voting commissions or to put it on the ballot via referendum, which is a more likely process.
And what about the Supreme Court just calling bullshit
on the census question?
On the census question, where it's, hey, we feel the question is legitimate.
Yeah.
We just don't believe your argument or trust your reasoning for doing so.
So that's exactly.
That was pretty cool.
That was also pretty cool. So this was a 5-4 decision, but it was Roberts joining the court's 4 liberal justices. And, if you read the opinion, completely did find the government credible in their reasoning, evidence to the contrary. And so that was the basis for rejecting the inclusion of the question in the census. That I think was a really interesting decision because a lot of people were fearful that it was going to go the other way.
So I completely understand, and I agree that it is a completely legitimate question. Are you a citizen of the United States? I don't think anybody disagrees with that.
And a lot of countries in their census do ask that question.
Makes total sense. It also, I have no faith in the Trump administration to ask that question and not to use that question for political purposes.
Well, and they do. I mean, if you look at, basically some of the advisors to the administration, we have evidence on the record that they want to use it to undercount minorities, to increase,
absolutely,
white voter strength.
It was a political strategist. Yeah. They document as the one who first kind of talked about the reinstitution of this. I think this question has been on there before.
Yeah, I think so, but I don't remember when.
I think they could kind of document that this came from a political space.
Yeah.
The reason that they wanted it was for political gain. And again, if you can't ignore all the context happening with immigration right now. It would be impossible to say we're going to put this question on the census, collect this data, and then politically do nothing with it. That makes absolutely no sense.
Right. It's been political from the beginning, and looking to gain leverage for Republicans in particular, the states that have the most to lose are states like, California and Texas and Florida that have growing Hispanic populations and states that are also trending Democrat in time.
Yes.
So that's, I think that was the incentive for the federal government here in going this route, and the court recognized it. The arguments just said to hold sway.
Yeah.
And so it was false justification they were using, and so that's what ended up being their downfall in this case.
So we're coming up on my least favorite holiday of the year, the 4th of July.
What?
It is not that I don't love celebrating the birth of America. It is once you have kids, you're just waiting for one of them to blow their finger off, blind themselves, or burn somebody's house down, your own perhaps, lighting fireworks off in the neighborhood.
And fireworks are legal in Platte County, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I figured.
Oh, yeah.
You're in the Missouri side, so it's kind of like anything goes.
I think they're whole legal in Missouri. They're not legal in Kansas, are they?
No, not in Johnson County. I know that. There's nothing legal except like sparklers and...
And that's...
And,
no one's going to do that.
Snappers and like tanks.
There have been
underground
multiple times I've been laying in bed at 2 a.m. It just said the next time I hear, the gigantic shell go off, that's it. I'm calling the cops. I've been out there 3 times telling these people, come on, isn't it time to shut this down?
Have you had any injuries yet? Like, knock on wood, nothing?
Oh, my God. We had one. We lived in our old neighborhood, and you might have seen this on the news. We had the gentleman who was having the party, who cops showed up at like midnight. He threw all of his fireworks into his oven at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
He turned the oven on to make some lasagna.
Oh my gosh!
I was at home for that, but my wife said shot out of bed at like 3:30 in the morning. He had so many fireworks in a bag that he put in his oven that when they exploded, he knocked his house off his foundation.
Whoa!
Yeah. He couldn't live in the house for like 4 months while they fixed it.
Wow.
This is why I despise the 4th of July. There have been times literally our neighborhood, it looks like Baghdad. There's just things exploding all over the place, and you're just waiting for something to burst into flames.
If you drive on I-35 through like downtown Kansas City in the West Bottoms, it does look like a war zone.
Explosions going off
smoke everywhere.
Yeah. I don't know how people, I don't know. I look at a lot of things as risk reward, and especially when you have kids.
Yeah,
it's like somebody is going to get hurt.
Well, see, I remember as a kid, I would go to my cousins out in rural Cass County, and we would shoot fireworks out there.
Yeah,
but I mean, there was a minimal age. I did not do it like at 5, 6, 7, 8.
No.
I think I had to be 12 before I was allowed to do 12 or 13. And so when you see these young kids that are shooting off fireworks, I'm just like, it's only a matter of time.
When's the last time you visited a good fireworks tent in Missouri?
It's been probably like 5 years or more.
Where buy one get 5 free.
Right.
You wait till 7 o'clock on the 4th, and you're just you see people in there just spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
That goes up in smoke.
That's
like
15 minutes worth of entertainment, and that's it. So
easily you could. I mean, I'm a big fan of. You can go to the big displays.
That's one thing.
Yeah.
Love the birth of our country. Glad America became a nation. Could live without the traditional 4th of July.
But I'm always worried about people that do shoot off, especially in the neighborhoods where the homes are so close together. And
Absolutely.
You get a straight bottle rocket that hits your house.
Burn something down.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it
happens every year too.
Missouri again. I'm not exactly for more government rules and regulation. We could ban fireworks, and I think that would be a pretty solid
Well, typically
thing.
that's on the local government level.
True.
When I was in Shawnee, this came up time and time again. We considered whether or not to allow fireworks or even just allow, a subset of fireworks. And we had the conversation. We never passed it because there just wasn't enough support for it. But
did you see the guy at OP who's dressing in the hazmat suit?
Yeah,
and
going door to door
bells at night. What is that?
I don't know. I mean, obviously some kind of prank, but I how did he come up with that? What's the?
It's like a homemade hazmat suit too. I'll tell you what. I live in Platte County. We wouldn't have that problem.
Right.
Somebody would shoot that guy night one.
I was going to say, if you're that guy, that's very dangerous to do. And of all times at night, people are not going to play games. They're gonna...
In my neighborhood, if you showed up in a homemade hazmat suit and rang somebody's doorbell at 3 a.m., I guarantee you are not making it off 25% of the porches in my neighborhood.
Yeah, that's not going to last long.
No, there would be a good old-fashioned posse, and that would be it for that. People in OP are just soft.
Yeah, that's the difference. Johnson County versus, Missouri.
That's our hour. Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Craig.